It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by HP Plus. In a world full of smart devices, isn't it about time your printer got smart too? Now printing is smart with HP Plus, and the HP Smart app is how it all happens. You can print from your phone with just a tap, no matter where you are, even from your garage/home office/yoga studio. Huh, that is smart. HP Plus. Learn more about smart printing at hp.com/smart.
In today's show, we're going to be talking about Dynasty Fantasy Basketball Leagues and some future projection things. It's going to be really interesting. Michael Bolton, he wants to hear what's going on.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_Beeble and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. We are going to be talking Dynasty today. It's going to be really, really intriguing. And, well, you know what? Let's just get straight into it and talk Dynasty Fantasy Basketball. To talk Dynasty Basketball, I'm going to be joined by a guest, and we're going to be planning to do these Dynasty shows regularly, semi-regularly. We haven't figured out the exact schedule, but let's introduce him now. His name is Kostya Medvedovsky. Kostya, welcome to the show for the first time.
Thanks, Josh.
Now, Kostya, if people don't know who you are, maybe they do, maybe they don't, you can go check out his Twitter handle. You can see it there on the video, which you can go find out. It's KMedved, so go and check him out there. Just explain to people a little bit about what you do in the basketball community.
Yeah, so I'm the creator of the Darko basketball projection system, which is a sort of a box score projection system similar to what exists in baseball with Zips or Steamer or Pacoda. And so what Darko does is it projects basic box score stats like points, rebounds, threes, three-point shooting, etc., along with a bunch of on-off metrics. And it's updated every day on the website. And the big thing it does that a lot of these other baseball systems don't do is that it updates every day, and it does so in a way that doesn't throw out any data. It remembers every game a player's ever played, but it weighs the more recent games more heavily. So it tries to answer that question of Colin Sexton shot 45% from three in the second half. What should we project him to shoot going forward?
So this is a great way to be able to look at guys potentially looking to break out. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at, Kostya has done some dynasty projections looking forward to perhaps fantasy rankings in the 2026 season, not including guys who haven't been drafted or rookies or anything like that, and trying to see some interesting players who are pushing up to the top of that list. But in terms of projecting breakouts type things, if I remember correctly, Kostya, when the Brandon Ingram shooting breakout occurred, you were pretty bullish on that being something that was real and being able to stick.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the cool things that Darko is able to do is it's able to look at the interaction between various box score stats. So if a guy, three-point shooting is super noisy, and if a guy shoots really hot from a three by itself, Darko might be pretty skeptical of that. But with Ingram, what happened was he simultaneously improved his three-point shooting as well as his free throw shooting. And so Darko saw that and saw these two things are happening at the same time. And it was able to sort of be more credulous of his breakout, that there's something going on with his shooting mechanics. Darko doesn't know exactly that it's shooting mechanics. It's a stat system, but it believed in the breakout a lot more than it would for a player who just shot hot from three without the improvement in his free throw shooting.
Yeah, I've talked about that on this podcast plenty of times, is that if you see someone who has an outlier three-point shooting season, but their free throws are still off, then you have a little bit of skepticism. It's why I have a level of skepticism about someone like Davion Mitchell coming in, who shot He was a terrible three-point shooter, shot 40% last year, but still was like, I think, a 67% free throw shooter in college. So there's a level of skepticism that I have there. I'm not Darko, but a level of skepticism I have that 40% three-point shooting remains a real number, and he becomes this elite or at least above average three-point shooter when the other numbers haven't necessarily kicked along with it, which is something that I was skeptical of Ingram's as well, but obviously I was wrong with that. And trying to tie those two things together is something that I'm going to be paying more attention to as we move forward, Kostya. All right, so we're going to talk about players here. You've projected out to 2026, so we're talking 5 years in the future here, and you're giving a list of the top fantasy players over that time frame, into that 2026 season, so we're getting 5 years in the future. And there were a few names there that really stood out as players who we think or you think are perhaps being maybe undervalued from a dynasty perspective, and who stood out as being ranked a little bit higher on your list. Let's start with the first guy. That's Goose, Anthony Edwards. He came out really, really high in your system.
Yeah, so the Darko system looks at I think 97 different metrics across a player, and it tries to project forward, like who's going to do well going forward. Like you said, this is 2026 rankings, and so with Edwards, the model's really big fan of. First of all, just obviously that he's young, that he was drafted high, so that's obviously a great projector. It also likes that he didn't really miss a lot of games, which especially for a young guy is a pretty good predictor. And the other stat that really popped for him was his personal foul rate, which you might not think of as being a major predictor of like fantasy value, but Darko is seeing something in that helps project future growth. It's not a driver of fantasy value by itself, but a pretty low personal foul rate from someone so young. Darko's seeing like a pretty good indication of, I don't know, maybe this guy sort of knows what he's doing on the court.
So we bring, or you run these projections to see how it comes out, and he came out as sixth. Of course, that's not including this group of rookies or next group of rookies, or Victor Wembanyama in 2 years' time. So maybe he pushes down to be like the 10th best player. Or there's Cade Cunningham jumps ahead of him, or Jalen Green jumps into this zone as well. We don't know that at this point, but Edwards to me is already being underrated from a fantasy perspective this year. I was not particularly high on him last year. Everyone would be well aware of that. And he was terrible for the beginning of the season in terms of fantasy production, and then blew up as the season went on. I think he's being undervalued a bit this season. I would not have thought of him being in that top 10 sort of range in 5 years' time. When we're looking at those numbers, what's the driving force behind being that high? Is it just being this absolutely high volume, high efficiency shooter, like a 30-point per game guy on 63 true shooting? Is it the defensive stats coming in? Is he adding other parts to his game, do you think?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is like you mentioned, he really came out in the second half, and so the high volume shooting, the defensive stats are all looking fairly promising. And again, one of the nice things about Darko is that it's able to blend this in with his age and his draft position, and so a guy like him, it became very credulous of his breakout. Really started to believe what was happening in the second half wasn't just noise. In a way that another fourth year guy who's drafted 25th maybe be like, I don't know about this.
That's really interesting. So for those of you, again, playing in dynasty leagues and you're trying to work out where the value of Anthony Edwards is, this projection system is looking at him pretty highly. Guys, football season is upon us. The NFL has started today. By the time you listen to this, the game is probably already underway, and you can place all of your bets for pro or college football at BetOnline. It is the number one place for you to go and do that. Place those bets at BetOnline. Head to that website, use your mobile device, and you can sign up today and receive a 100% welcome bonus by using our promo code LOCKEDON. All those updated odds, props, and contests are there as well, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest, open now at BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports, from football, basketball, boxing, or even your favorite Vegas casino games. So don't wait. Take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline are your online sportsbook experts. And if you are watching the game, you might have that on one device, and then there's something else to watch your favorite shows and stream them. And then you got your highlights you watch on your phone, and there's another login you got to have. It's all over the place. There's so many remotes and devices and passwords. It's hard to keep everything together, but there is a new product that is a simple way to get all the entertainment you love all in one spot, and that is Direct TV Stream. It brings all of your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with Direct TV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required and content varies by package. Next player we're going to talk about. So you got Anthony Edwards here. You're looking at 6th in these numbers. This next guy comes out almost as high. DeAndre Ayton, 8th. Now, Ayton took a sizable fantasy step backwards last season. He was a 2010 top 20 sort of player. And then he went and was outside the top 50 last season with the addition of Chris Paul. Now, he did step it up in the playoffs, but Darko is very, very bullish on where Ayton heads from now. It's his age 23 season coming up. I think he's going to be better than last season, but yeah, that's a pretty high number for DeAndre Ayton. So what do you think this system is looking at there to see him elevate into that elite level?
Yeah, I was surprised with Ayton. I was not a fan of him, so to speak. I really thought there might be some real risk that he was just a dinosaur and couldn't really play in the modern NBA. But obviously he did great in the playoffs. And one of the other nice things that Dark was able to do is it looks at playoff data. There's a lot of it out there. And it weighs playoff data more heavily, both because it's more recent and because it's against a tougher level of competition. And Ayton started to pop in the playoffs. Ayton again, he's youngish. He's not 19 anymore, but he was obviously number one pick. He's got that going for him. Darko's also a big fan of his. One of the metrics is short mid-range shots. He actually shot pretty well from there. And Darko's a sort of bullish on that aspect of his game and thinks that portends well for the growth elsewhere.
It'd be interesting to see if Ayton can get to this level. Like getting to a top 10 fantasy player is pretty hard to do as any player really. But the centers that we see in that area now, Embiid, Towns, Jokic, Davis, they're the four guys who are in that area, and they block a ton of shots. Most of those guys are not Jokic, but Jokic brings you 10 assists per game, which Ayton isn't going to do. They are generally efficient from the field and from the line, which Ayton already has that part, and that can improve with higher volume as well. He needs to get to the free throw line a lot more, but the ability to hit those shots is there. So once he starts, you're pushing and working that free throw advantage. There is that scope. You got those guys like Embiid, who's just obviously a huge foul drawer, big rebounder, good shot blocker. So he's got those little parts there. So again, when I look at it like a shit, Ayton at 8 feels ridiculously high to me. Then I go, well, the parts are there. Like the good efficiency is there. Get the volume up. He can start to block more shots. He can rebound at a high level. He can score at a high level. The parts are there for him.
Yeah, there's a lot of underlying components for him. He could put a lot of stuff together. Now, obviously, like you mentioned at the outset, this isn't really saying he's going to be 8th because there's going to be new guys coming in the league over the next 5 years. So 8th out of the guys currently in the league, maybe that filters to like 15th or something when you factor in all those guys. But this is still a pretty bullish number. I was surprised to see this one.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing in this show today, is looking at guys that maybe stood out to us or surprised us that projected this high. It's not saying he will be the 8th best guy, because situations change. Like we wouldn't have expected, 2 years ago that Chris Paul would come in and he'd drop his fantasy ranking on a season-by-season basis by 30 spots just based on that. But it happened, and things do change. But it's just highlighting the things that maybe aren't necessarily, especially after having a season where he stepped back as much as he did, that in a dynasty format, if you're looking to acquire a player, you can maybe get him at a little bit of a discount. If even 80% of this forward projection comes true, you're probably getting that at a pretty sizable discount there. The next guy, he's in his age 23 season as well. PJ Washington Jr. for the Charlotte Hornets comes out ranked 26th. Now, Washington, again, has got that versatile game. You can hit threes, you can block shots, rebounds all right, you can score okay. He had some significant efficiency issues over the course of last season, which really did hurt. There is competition for minutes, I guess, with Miles Bridges and Mason Plumlee. Let me start the question first on Washington. Does Darko have any preference? I know what I see and what I've seen from year-by-year numbers, but does Darko have a preference saying that PJ Washington can get to this good if he plays more minutes at center? Does it look into it that way? Darko's
aware of what position a guy plays, but I don't know. I don't know offhand which position it sort of prefers a guy in terms of projecting future growth. Darko's it's not totally a black box model, but there's a lot of components into it. I need to dig into that piece a little more, to be honest.
Washington, yeah, from a year-by-year redraft perspective, when he played at centre, the numbers were better. When he plays at power forward, the numbers are worse. He's still only like 6'8", maybe 6'9", so he's not huge, but he can hold down that centre position. But coming out 26 was definitely surprising to me. What is it that we're liking here for him from a future projection perspective?
Yeah, so his best metric here was his assist rate, which coming out, that by itself, it's not a spectacular assist rate, but from a big, it was pretty solid. Darko was reasonably pleased with what it saw, and I thought that sort of portends well for future growth. He's a guy I think who could stretch on a good team and like really expand his role a lot. He seems like a player who has a pretty high ceiling to me if he can find a good role.
Yeah, I think role is going to be really important for him as well. And the passing is not something I've ever really thought about with PJ Washington. He's a guy that gets defensive stats. He shows the ability to shoot the three and do that at relatively high volume, not necessarily relatively high percentages at this point, but maybe that can come in as well. But yeah, role could be really interesting to see where he goes moving forward. But this one, that was almost the most surprising one to me, to see him at number 26 on this list. The next guy, Isaiah Stewart. Second season, he's age 20. He came in at number 31. Now, I was pretty skeptical of Stewart when he was drafted. I was impressed with him last season. I'm still not 100% convinced that he is a guy that you look at and go, we've got our starting centre position absolutely locked down. Under no circumstance are we looking at any other options there. Like, I think he can be a really solid starting centre. I didn't view him as maybe a top 5 or a top 10 starting centre in the NBA. But it's a pretty bullish projection on Stewart. What is it that, from what we saw from him last season, where he barely started games, he was coming off the bench most of it, role increases as the season went on, but what is the Darko system liking from what it saw from Isaiah Stewart?
So the biggest metric for him was his steal rate. And so Darko's, again, it's sort of looking at a lot of these secondary indications just as like what they show about a player's potential growth. Steal rate is famously really predictive of how good a player is in on-court value. And so, just having a pretty good steal rate, especially from a big, can help predict playing time that, a coach is actually going to trust him. It sort of indicates maybe like, he's got a high basketball IQ, or he's going to figure it out. So beyond just his age, that was the biggest thing that Darko was like, this is a pretty good predictor for his future.
The other thing with Stewart is I think he has shown the ability to be a serviceable three-point shooter. Not saying he's going to be an 8 threes a game big man, but someone that maybe takes 4 a game, hits 1.5 of those per game, and has at least some level of threat on a pick and pop, or to be able to create some more spacing out there. He's obviously a solid rebounder, pretty good rim protector for his size as well. There are a lot of things that work in his favor from a fantasy perspective. I'd like to see him do a little bit more on court before I just pencil him in as 33 minutes a night, starting center for the next 10 years type of a player. But there are absolutely some positive indicators for him, and that I think he's getting underdrafted this season for redraft leagues, as I've spoken about before. But that is it's a pretty high number in terms of his long-term dynasty production for this Detroit Pistons team. Before we get on to the next couple of... go ahead, Kosha.
I was just going to say, just to add generally, the further down this list you sort of go, the more you're going to run into this issue of more new guys coming in the league.
Yep.
So at the top of the list, it might be only a couple new guys come in the league, but by the time you get to 30th, I wouldn't be surprised if 15 of those guys aren't in the NBA yet.
Yeah, and I guess this is part of my thing with talking about Isaiah Stewart, and people have, I think maybe one or two people said, how dare you say that he's not like a core piece on this team for the Pistons? And I go, okay, I just worry about where the actual upside, how high he can go. And this is, he's 31 here. Maybe there's another 20 guys that come in, and maybe he tops out as like a top 40, top 45 fantasy player, which is still really, really solid. But getting to that, where you are core franchise piece, you probably want to be pushing to be a top 5 center, a top 7 center in the NBA. And I'm not sure he can get to that number. But again, when sites at the moment have got his ADP at like 120, Like, there's real value in that, not only for this year, but for moving forward. But I wonder if he tops out in 3 or 4 years' time and maintains that solid level of production for 4 or 5 years, but doesn't actually get to that next step. And I think that's sort of where we're looking at with Isaiah Stewart. Kostya, question for you. Do you know how to fix your own car?
I do not.
Neither do I. That's good. Getting more of the auto illiterate people here onto the show. But if you do know how to fix your own car and you're looking for parts, there's no point going to a local chain auto parts store, just wasting time and wasting money. You have access to the largest catalog that you can find with Rock Auto in your pocket, on your phone, in your computer. So go to Rock Auto. They are a family business online who have been serving auto parts customers for 20 years. Why would you spend 30, 50, 70, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or worse, a car dealership? Brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or even new carpet. Rock Auto has it all covered for you. So go check out rockauto.com, find all the parts that you need for your car or truck, and in the how did you hear about us box, write Locked On so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And while you are browsing the Rock Auto catalog, why don't you get yourself a Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever. And if you haven't tried Built Bar, what are you waiting for? You can get yourself a mixed box right now, get all 9 of their flavors, 2 of each, and you get to try and figure out what your favorite is. Mine is cookies and cream. There's raspberry, that's great as well. Coconut, there's orange, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, so many great flavors. But these are not just delicious tasting protein bars. These are also good for you. 17 to 18 grams of protein, 4 to 5 grams of sugar, 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, and 130 to 180 calories. Kostya, I've got a question for you. You're a man of science. Do you know what a gram is?
Only vaguely.
My confusion remains that I'm reading this thing from an American company and they're telling me how many grams of protein. I know what it is, but most people in America don't know what a gram is in terms of measurements. But anyway, that's really beside the point because these are the best tasting protein bars ever and they are healthy. Trust me, 17 to 18 grams of protein is really good. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll save 15% off. So go to built.com, promo code is LOCKED15. Built Bar are the best tasting protein bars ever. 2 more players we're going to cover off on today's show. Kostya, the next guy, Patrick Williams, age 20 season, second year in the NBA. He comes out ranked 35th on Darko. He is going to be in a situation where he's starting again this year in Chicago. He is going to be in a situation where, honestly, if his usage dipped below 10%, I wouldn't be completely surprised playing alongside some of the other guys. But when we're talking dynasty, we're not looking necessarily at the short term. Who knows how long DeMar DeRozan's even in Chicago, and Vooch's 30 plus, and Levine's still there. But at some point, Williams hopefully is going to take that step forward. I am, from an eye test perspective, I'm not as high on Williams developing into a high level. Like this sort of rank, you puts him in not quite prime Gordon Hayward type areas, but it's not far off. I didn't really view him that way. I'm going to take a guess that the reason that Darko is really liking him is that steal rate that he put up as a rookie as well.
Absolutely. The steal rate combined with just being so young and high draft pick, Darko's really optimistic just about potential growth. It doesn't really think he was particularly good last year, but I think that there's a lot of growth left just because of that steal rate in particular.
We saw him take on a larger offensive load in Summer League. He was really unable to finish at all in terms of 2-point stuff, which is a little bit of a concern, but he did hit his threes last season pretty well, albeit on really small volume. We'd like to see that be able to go up. I think he only attempted 3.9 per game or something like that, something really small. Anyway, in terms of his 3-point attempt rate, but the steal rate was encouraging. He's a guy at Florida State. I think he had a pretty solid block rate as well, which if all that comes together, that translates really well to fantasy. We've seen it. Nerlens Noel, guys like Derek White, players who can put up big steal rates, big block numbers, and then anything else that comes onto that, whether it's assists or threes or scoring, whatever, is a bonus. And you bring those defensive stats, not saying he's averaging 2 steals and a block, but 1.5 steal and 0.9 blocks. Yeah, that's not outrageous. 2 threes a game, 18 points, 20 points, maybe an Otto Porter type of career. Otto Porter was always a high steal rate guy. I think that's the sort of level that I'd be looking at for Williams to get to in those next 5 years or so. Is that the sort of player that you're looking at him to be?
Yeah, that sounds about right for him. This isn't part of these rankings, but one of the things Darko does is it also has sort of an estimate of variance of how much upside the guy has beyond this. And Williams, he didn't really have that sort of like top 15 upside or anything in the system, at least in this part of the model. But it just thinks that he's got a good good base to build from at least. So 35th plus those guys coming in the league, maybe you're talking like a 50th, 60th kind of ranked guy.
The next guy and the last guy we're going to talk about is someone that I'm going to let people try and guess who this is at this point. Someone in last year's preseason. The amount of questions that I got about this guy was insane. People were expecting, he's going to get 27 minutes a night. He's going to be this awesome top 70 player. Like just look what he's doing here in preseason. It's all going to happen for him. And I was trying to preach caution and say there's a chance this dude doesn't even play every single night. I wonder if you've guessed who it is. If you have, drop it in the comments below. But his name is Talen Horton-Tucker. He plays for Los Angeles Lakers. His numbers look great. He has an issue with shooting at times, but we saw last year he literally wasn't an every night rotation player. He played most nights, but he wasn't. He was like their 10th, 11th man a lot of the time. Now, he's 20. He's played 2 years in the NBA. He's going to turn 21 in, I think, 3 or 4 months' time. He is signed to a pretty sizable contract for a guy of his experience and production so far. But his fantasy profile with his steal rate, block rate, assists, rebounds, scoring, all that stuff is really good. The worry we have with him is shooting, Kostya. But Darko's relatively high on him here. This is an interesting one to me because Darko's got him 49th in 2026. We look at Patrick Williams and we say 49th, we push him back to maybe 60th, 65th, whatever, with other players coming in. I look at Patrick Williams and go, I don't think that Williams can be much higher than that. I look at Horton-Tucker and go, I actually think there is upside for him to be better than this, like significantly better than this if a few things go his way. I think that there is real significantly big upside, even if it doesn't hit until, say, 2024.
Yeah, he's one of the guys that Darko had the highest sort of uncertainty bands around. Just obviously, he had a mixed playing time record coming in, so it doesn't have as good a grasp as to who he is. The model likes, again, his steal rate. That was the single best box score metric for him. It likes that he's young. One of the features I'm working into Darko is contract status. So it likes that he got a pretty sizable deal. That's just an indication that the team believes in him. Is going to get him playing time. You can be the best player in the world. If the team's not going to play you, you're not going to generate value.
Shout out to D'Anthony Melton.
Yeah, exactly. So Darko likes all those things. He's got some downside there too. Like you said, he's got some shooting woes, and just there's a lot of uncertainty given he doesn't have quite the track record of being an every night guy as some of these other guys. Also, just a relatively low draft spot. He's went 46th, and so Darko's just sees like the track record of those guys. Teams can be a little bit less committed to them at times.
Does Darko look at the fact that he's got like about a plus 35 wingspan? I know it's not exactly what it is, but does it look at that and go, Jesus, this guy's arms are insane? Like, does it look at measurables and measurements that way?
I have height and weight in the model. I don't have combine data. I'm trying to build that in. The issue is getting that data reliably back far enough. I need to go back the whole training set data period. So for now, it just has his height and weight.
And I think he's 6'9", as a guy that can handle the ball. That's a really interesting fantasy skill set: steals, blocks, assists, rebounds, scoring.
Yeah,
and then bring efficiency into that. Like to me, there is like you said, there's so much uncertainty. If he was a top 20 player in 5 years' time, I would not be shocked at all. But I'd also wouldn't be shocked if he never became a regular starter because the shot is just so off, and he never gets there. But yeah, he's got. I don't know if it's exactly like a Kyle Anderson style fantasy game, but with, I think, more scope to ramp usage up, whereas Anderson can get his steals, he gets his assists, he passes well. He's developed into a semi-reliable three-point shot, but really not a high-volume guy, whereas I think Horton-Tucker can do all of that, plus be able to ramp that volume up at some point in his career. So I am pretty high on where he's going to be able to go, even though the percentage chance of him getting there, I tend to agree with Darko on that he probably, the odds are he probably won't get there, but when you're taking lottery tickets and trying to get value in a guy, then THT can be one of those players. Kostya, first show done, dynasty-wise. thanks for coming on, talking to us through the Darko model. People are going to have lots of questions, I am sure. And if you do have questions for us, drop them in the comments on this video below. You can tweet them at us. I'm at redrock_Beeble, Kostya at KMedved. And we might even do a Dynasty mailbag show for our next one if people have enough questions. We'll put out calls for that anyway. But let us know what you think of doing a Dynasty-focused show like this and doing it semi-regularly and the sort of things that you want to hear from us as we move forward. Kostya, thank you for coming on. First time on the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, and it won't be the last. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Guys, that'll do it for today's show. As I said, leave your feedback down below. Tell us in the comments what you think. And what sort of stuff you'd want us to do on Dynasty-focused shows moving forward. I'm sure we will do some sort of Dynasty mock draft at some point coming up in the next couple of weeks. But don't forget to follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app on YouTube. Thumb it up, comment down below, ring the notification bell. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.